Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussion, reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics.
I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenand.
Thanks for joining us. So on this episode of the show, Dustin decided he's been dying to watch an art house classic.
It's taken a while to convince Mike, only about a year.
And the film that Dustin chose was David Lynch's 1977 surrealistic psychosexual dark nightmare fantasy, Eraserhead.
Also known as that art house movie that you show to your friends when you feel like being an asshole to them. That was after about 8 months of trying to get him to do 2001. But I latched onto this one and would not let go.
So, rolling the credits on this movie, Eraserhead was directed by David Lynch, produced by David Lynch, and written by David Lynch. It starred Jack Nance, Charlotte Stewart, Alan Joseph, and Gene Bates. Music was by David Lynch, Fats Waller, and Peter Ivers. Cinematography was by Frederick Elms and Herbert Caldwell. It was edited by David Lynch. It's distributed by Lieber Films International and was released on March 19th, 1977.
It ranks 183rd on the Critics' Poll on Sight and Sound's top movies of all time and 224th on the Directors' Poll.
It also places second in the Online Film Critics Society poll of the 100 best directorial debuts, right behind Orson Welles' Citizen Kane.
And for all it matters, it's a critical darling, Stanley Kubrick's favorite film. Lots of people seem to love this movie, or hate the crap out of it, depending on who you talk to.
And I really didn't know what to expect going into this movie. I've seen a few David Lynch films, and most recently I watched Mulholland Drive, which I think is an amazing movie, but in some ways it's impenetrable. So I resisted diving into Eraserhead, but I really liked this movie. Pretty much from the opening frames, I was brought into it and kind of actively participating with what I was watching, trying to figure out what was going on. And honestly, it's a pretty compelling, provocative, captivating movie.
You're one of those.
And to be fair, you've talked about this movie in the past. As long as I've known you, you've brought up Eraserhead. And you've always talked about, you've had this kind of love-hate relationship with it. You love to inflict it on people. but you've always said that you kind of hated the film.
Actually, I'm not sure I necessarily hated it, but this is, I think, my fifth viewing of the film. I've inflicted it on a number of people, but it's definitely an odd movie. It's one that I know most people are not going to like or appreciate.
But I found it very interesting that just from conversations we've had in the past, as we were coming near the end of this film, you were like, yeah, this, I'm really starting to get it. It's starting to make, it's way more literal than I've ever kind of given it credit for. So I'm kind of curious.
Heaven help me, it's making sense.
I'm kind of curious what your take on that is.
I've done a lot of reading on Eraserhead in the last decade or so since I started watching it over and over again, apparently. And for the most part, the synopses that I've read have said that it's about him being trapped. And that's the most basic thing down to it. And so I'll admit, for the movie, I was kind of looking for that as I was watching, and it became actually very easy to see. It's probably just the fact that I'm much older now. It's been about 6-7 years since my last viewing of it, at least 6-7 years, and it is way more literal than I remember, for sure, as long as you're paying attention. At first, a whole lot of the beginning stuff doesn't really seem to have much to do with anything as far as I'm concerned. You got the guy with the levers up in the moon. You got him sort of the floating head in space, spitting out the sperm, which floats off into nothing, which I guess is symbolic of his having impregnated his girlfriend. A tale old as time, the man with the levers and the throwing up sperm, I guess, in space. moves on to eventually he meets up with his girlfriend. You have the puppies all suckling at the dog. You have the very tiny chicken sort of giving birth as the mother freaks out and then the daughter freaks out, all sort of hinting towards he got her pregnant. It's a weird-ass way of saying it, but it was all just pointing towards that the whole time.
So much sexual imagery in this movie. Everything from, something as slapstick and simple as when his wife, Mary, is trying to pull the suitcase out from under the bed.
She's just shaking
and rocking the bed back and forth. Yeah. To, all the spermatozoa and the blood, the reproductive stuff. All the body horror seems to point towards,
hell, even the baby's shaped as a spermatozoa.
Yeah, like it's kind of like the horror of reproduction. And I found an interesting...
And before all this, he was on vacation, and I think that's an important thing to point out. They point that out a couple times. What do? I'm on vacation. Well, what do you do when you're not on vacation, you asshole? His being on vacation is a very important part.
Explain your view on that. I actually didn't form any thoughts on that. I thought it was kind of a throwaway line.
No, at the beginning, he's wandering around a whole lot. He's sort of free to do whatever he wants. Yeah, he's in his little hovel and whatnot, but he mentions being on vacation at the beginning, but very quickly after he moves in with Mary, he's not on vacation anymore. He's on vacation, he can take care of the baby, and things better be good when he gets back. All of a sudden, his entire life becomes this baby. He's stuck in this room. If he tries to leave, it starts to cry and he can't get out of there.
Right.
At first, when he goes back home, she's feeding the baby. He's lying on the bed. He smiles at them. He's staring off into the radiator and just seeing some lights in there. Not a big deal. But for the latter half of the movie, he's in that room. There's no getting out of that room. Mary comes and goes. He doesn't even notice her coming and going, but he's stuck in that room as opposed to wandering around like he normally does, apparently with his free time.
Yeah, there was that one line where the beautiful woman from across the hall asks where Mary is, and he says she must be at her parents' again, which does seem to imply that Mary does come and go.
And she was freaking out having the kid. Like, she was crying and losing her mind over the lack of sleep, and he was honestly fine at that point. It isn't until she leaves and it's all up to him that he starts to lose it a little bit.
I suppose it could imply that she comes and goes, or it could imply she's gone and he's fibbing. He's fabricating a story. So much of this movie, I think, is inside his head, sort of from his weird, twisted perspective on all of these things. It's through his filter. I think the lady in the radiator is his subconscious. I think the reason why the baby is such a horrific creature is because of the impact that it's made on his life. There's also so many things, like, I feel like a lot of this film is about having the insides on the outside. And I think that's part of the framework, the surrealist framework of it. It kind of clicked when I saw him lying in bed, and there's a plant on an end table, on a nightstand next to the bed.
It's actually on a chair. It's just a pile of dirt with a dead plant sticking out of it, and it was there the whole movie.
It's a plant without a pot. And it's like the dirt, which is normally contained within a pot, is essentially outside. It's open, it's exposed. And so much of this movie, I think these are his feelings and his thoughts and his anxieties and his fears and his hopes and his dreams and everything. But they're like externalized in this really weird, dreamlike, dark fantasy, Kafkaesque kind of way. And that's kind of how I put that together.
I wouldn't know necessarily about that, but I really started latching on to the him being trapped notion as he was there inside the room and had to stick around the baby, especially once it got sick, which was instantaneous. But baby gets sick, he's sitting there all the time. The woman from across the hall knocks on the door. He sees this as a temporary escape. He's covering up the baby's mouth. They have sex. She sees the baby, and later on, the only other time you see her, she's with another man. It shows him standing in the doorway. His heads are placed with the baby. And to me, that's just, now she sees him as only having a baby. That's all he is, and she can't hook up with that. Hooking up with a married man's one thing, but a father is completely different. She doesn't want to deal with kids. Prior to this, you had the whole radiator scene where the lady in the radiator starts singing, "In Heaven Everything is Fine." Then he walks onto stage. He sees all the dead spermatozoa that she stomped on earlier on in the movie. And to me, he was formulating the mental idea of, if I kill this baby, then all is good. She's singing "In Heaven Everything is Fine," justifying this whole reasoning. His head pops off with the whole rolling he's He's rolling a curtain rod. His head pops off when the baby's head pops up through there. And they have this whole scene where his head gets picked up by a kid, brought over to a house with the best scene in the movie as far as I'm concerned. Guy starts just hammering on the buzzer. Dude runs out pissed off. "Okay, Paul!" And they drill a core sample of his brain, which is now an eraser that they add onto a pencil with this fancy machine. Dude writes a line, which is the shape of a spermatozoa if you want to really dig deep and find meaning in everything. He erases it, says, "It's okay," and then he blows off the eraser shavings, which you see at the end of the movie around his head after he enacts the plan of kill the baby. It's basically the longest scene of light bulb pops above his head, maybe I should just kill the baby, that you've ever had. The story itself is pretty much like a 3-minute story. Guy finds out he has a kid, feels trapped by having a kid, and his girlfriend can't handle it, so he kills the kid. That's the entire story.
The script itself is like a 20-page script, and it's like a 90-minute movie. So, I mean, so much of this movie does go without dialogue, and I remember thinking at the beginning, like, I was dying to hear just humans speaking. It didn't even have to make sense, but there's so much in the soundscape of this movie, the sound design of this movie. It's well known for its sound design, and I do think it is a pretty remarkably well put together film, kind of on all levels, and I do think that the sound is not only well done, but like really important to the narrative as well. I think the changes in the sounds, I think, just kind of talking about the reproduction and the sexual imagery and the sounds, just kind of coalescing in this moment right here. The dog with the baby dogs.
And that was noisy as heck.
Yeah, and it was this really loud suckling noise, aggravatingly so, and it was kind of like the elephant in the room because he was sitting there, Mary was next to him, her mother was sitting in the rocking chair, and they were like making small talk.
Just basking in the awkwardness, which is like 90% of the movie.
And, I mean, it's the dog is a mother, and she's got the puppies who are all suckling, and yeah, I mean, it's, in my opinion, it's a manifestation of kind of what's in the air. Like I said, the elephant in the room.
Mary's pregnancy.
Mary's mom knows Mary is having her anxiety attack, and it's possible that Henry knows, and everyone's kind of avoiding talking about it, but it's there. It's sitting there, and it's right in their faces, and the sound design helps accentuate that.
I actually don't think that Henry knows, since she disappeared on him a while ago, wouldn't come over, and he brought that up when he showed up. I didn't even know if he wanted me to come or not, sort of deal. He'd never met the parents.
Very likely, yeah.
So it was sort of just dropped on him during his nice, happy little vacation.
Another thing that I really loved about this movie, Lynch is known for his, like, odd sense of slapstick humor, which he injects. I mean, Twin Peaks is rife with it. It's in just about everything that he does. And I kind of felt that, in a way, this movie was really good at sort of parodying or shining a light on some of the stresses of domestic life. I mean, there's the weird, like, horror child sitting on the bureau, and she gets up because it won't stop crying, and she's like, I can't take it anymore, and I have to leave.
Shut up.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, you know, I've had kids. I've been there. I've had that moment. I've seen, you know, other people have that moment.
I've had pets, and I've had that moment.
And there's the scene where he's lying in bed. I honestly couldn't make out if he was lying in bed with Mary, or if that was a dream sequence, or if that was the beautiful girl. It wasn't the beautiful girl next door. I think it was Mary.
Is it the one where Mary's sort of all wrapped up,
all twitchy and
yeah, creepy, and then having the spermatozoa things that he grabs and throws against the wall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throwing the weird spermatozoa against the wall aside, that moment is in her twitching and movement, like she's kind of hogging the bed, and he's like, can you give me some space? Can you move? Like, just give me a little bit of space? And I'm thinking,
he's trapped.
Not only is he trapped, but it's humorous because I think in a way, in a very, it uses kind of a very banal, very domestic thing. Again, I've been in that spot where someone's hogging the bed. But then it carries on and it goes into this more kind of horrific, weird, surreal, absurdist thing. But I love how Lynch takes these very, like I said, banal domestic moments, things that are very real and relatable, and he plays them in kind of a weird way, in a humorous way. it's a nice contrast. I like the way that they play off each other.
The two that I can think of are Mary's dad when he comes out and he's just squawking about all the pipes in his town and doing his weird smile thing that he does every now and then where he smiles and stares right through your soul. But he comes out, he's like, people think pipes just grow in their houses. I put down every inch of pipe in this neighborhood. Look at my knees. He runs out trying to hold his pants tight so you can see his knees, and his wife's like, dear, just get back in the kitchen. Just starts pushing him back. And when she goes into the kitchen, the second moment is when you've got the grandmother there. She puts the salad bowl on her lap, has her grab the 2 spoons, has her toss it while holding her hands, basically treating her like a puppet, takes it away, and then gives her a cigarette. It's like, and I helped. Shake and bake. Just weird little moments like that, I'm guessing, is what you're talking about.
But I also wonder if that moment, because essentially she is the previous generation, and she is either Mary's mother's mother or Mary's father's mother, and she seems to be sort of trapped and has been trapped for a long time by her children. She's just sitting there in that chair in the kitchen. She doesn't move. She has no more life.
They suck the soul right out of you.
They do. And
let's hope his kids don't watch or listen to us.
My kids don't listen to anything that I do.
Nothing that you say, anyway.
But that's one of the appeals to a movie like this, is that you jokingly said you can take a film like this and decide before even watching the first frame of it what it's going to be about, and attribute meaning to every scene. But I think there are explanations that are more right than wrong, but I think there's a lot of leeway, there's a lot of play, there's a lot of conversation that can be had and take you into some interesting directions. That's the whole point of a film like this being provocative. I know we've had discussions in the past about, just in case anybody can hear the cat in the background, there is a cat, Prada, the unofficial mascot maybe of FYC.
One of the things that I know we've talked about is like David Lynch and his refusal to talk about what his movies mean, Mulholland Drive in particular, because I went to look up what he was doing when I saw it, and I saw that, he was asked by a lot of people, and he steadfastly refused to answer them directly. He's like, yes, this movie has a through line. It has a cohesive plot, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Here's 9 clues. I remember clue number 3, I think, is pay attention to the red phone. And I consider that a bit of an asshole move, because when we're talking about movies and art house stuff, it's essentially a different language. There are things that have meaning that most of us aren't simply aware of. It's not stuff that's not in our lexicon. And if I were at some friends' places, I might say lexicon, and they'd have to ask me what that means, because it simply hasn't come up in their lifetime. And I would explain it to them.
Those friends know who they are.
Those friends know who they are. David Lynch, he's using the language of high art, of art house kind of stuff, where certain colors, certain scenes, certain imagery will have certain meanings, but we don't know what that is because we didn't all go to art school. We aren't told specifically what it all means, and when someone asks him, instead of saying, oh, lexicon means this, he's saying, tough, if you don't know what it means, figure it out. And I find that to be a bit of a dick move. These are people trying to understand and appreciate your movie, who are trying to get your vision. Help them out a little bit and give them something better than follow the red phone. Poetry, if you talk about that, people will have sort of imagery within imagery, and you try to help someone through to understand what it is you're trying to say. Are you not trying to express yourself? I find it kind of rude to withhold information for seemingly no reason.
I agree and disagree. I agree in the sense that I would like someone to sit down and just point for point go through Mulholland Drive and say, this is what it is. I've had discussions in the past where I think it's more or less been pieced together, and it kind of makes sense to me, and I want to watch it again at some point to sort of see if that works. I'm eager to sit down in the near future and watch Eraserhead again, knowing what I know now, having seen it. But I also understand the need or the desire of the artist to want to provoke conversation, provoke thought. I mean, as someone who's done some writing myself, I've written things that other people have read, and they have read into that things I never intended to put in there, which kind of expands the concept and the sort of scope of it. It's rewarding. And if they don't need to know, I mean, I think part of our frustration is that as fans of film, as people who like the behind the scenes stuff, we like to know sort of where everything's coming from, what everything means.
The thing is, it doesn't have to be absolutely everything, but a general idea, the gist of things. Because with the gist, you can then look for the pieces and the meanings yourself. It'll still leave that room for discussion, that room for finding hidden meanings that might not have been intended by the artist in the first place. But if you have it like here, watching it this time, I had the general idea of him being trapped, and I was able to piece together a lot. That's all I needed. All I needed was that slight little overarching plot.
But by your own admission, you had it.
I hadn't what?
You had it. You had the knowledge. You went into it having done some legwork, having seen the movie repeatedly. You went into it.
None of those other times made any sense to me, but this time knowing just that one little detail, and that's all I needed to hear. Whereas something like Mulholland Drive, he says, yes, there's a plot. I'm not going to tell you what it is. If he were to just say, just give me 2 phrases. That's all I need. And I think that's
he gave
all
you 9
anyone
clues.
might need. Follow the red phone is not a clue. That is pointing out something that I should, in theory, notice myself later on.
I would have to look at the movie again, but knowing the way Lynch puts things together, saying follow the red phone is probably a very useful clue.
How it's been deciphered was something along the lines of when the phone is red, it is reality. When it's not, it is fantasy. Something along those lines. But having just sort of a minor explanation for people who are interested will allow them to go into these films, look for stuff, and start to understand future films that they watch. Not just one film, but all art house kind of things as an entire genre. Not focusing entirely on how your film affects them, but how their thought is expanded in general is, I think, something that's important.
Now, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a populist. I very much support the idea of people being given access to things and being introduced to things and not being made felt like an idiot for not getting something. However, I think some of the people that you might be talking about are people who they might not naturally have the intellectual curiosity to seek out this film in the first place, never mind doing the legwork to try and understand some of the more intricate symbolism or meanings, or even just, something like Mulholland Drive, deciding if something is reality or fantasy. It's part of the reason why Twin Peaks didn't succeed on a certain level, because they never wanted to solve the murder of Laura Palmer. That was, as far as David Lynch was concerned, that wasn't what the show was about. But because people tend to be more literal, they were like, who killed Laura Palmer? When is this going to be solved? So they had to solve it, and that ended up undermining the show. And so, some people would argue, leave those cloth-eared nincompoops to watching The Bachelorette. And, the people who want to see this movie or need to see this movie will find this movie. Which kind of goes against, like I said, my usually populist views on things like this. But I do think that has a lot to do with it. Intellectual curiosity.
And certain people are going to find this movie, and I'm not saying it has to be 100% accessible to everyone. Even if you make something as simple as a slasher film, you're not making that movie for everyone. You're making that movie for people who like slasher films. You're making an art house movie for people who like art house movies. And when you do the legwork, I'm just saying, how much legwork should you really have to do to get a clue? When I saw it initially, I had only seen a few random scenes of the baby, and I was like, what the heck nonsense is this? And that's how I found a lot of movies. I'd see one clip, and I'm like, I'm going to put this into context. And so after I see it, then I go looking for, hey, what the heck is even going on here? And I'm relying on other people to interpret what the director says, and I might find 2 or 3 different things. It took me a while to find something cohesive when I could just get a simple clue from the director. Just a simple byline, a tagline is almost all I'd say you'd have to give. It's not making it 100% accessible to the cloth-eared nincompoops to give an overall plot that someone would have to find in an interview at some point. If you have to go to Wikipedia and find, here's the one thing the director has to say about it, and it's one sentence, it's not going to make or break the movie, I don't think. And yes, once you see the movie, maybe you don't know how to interpret it. You go out, you find this single line, you come back and you watch it, and you might appreciate it in a different way, especially if you're growing in like film critiquing and studying and whatnot.
I'm torn on the whole thing because I think it's equally a dick move, and I also believe that the artist's integrity, or the integrity of the artist's work, if they wanted to be upheld without giving out any information they don't want to give out, I think that's fine too. As maddening as it can be to me sometimes, because I'm still working out The Fountain. Which remains one of my favorite movies of all time. Darren Aronofsky, we're looking at you. But yeah, it's It's an argument that I personally can't settle for myself.
You actually brought up another thing about David Lynch withholding information tonight, and that's the special effects concerning the baby itself. You're saying that somebody was blindfolded so they wouldn't know what was going on, and he refuses to tell anyone 40 years later how on earth that was done. And there's the theories that it was a skinned rabbit. It's this kind of withheld information when people are naturally curious. Now, I can see that something like that might be sort of sketchy and you might not want people to know, but withholding information from people who are looking for it, why are you doing it? It's not for national security. I can't really justify that. If you're trying to express yourself, it's the equivalent to me of somebody saying, the old, why are you upset? Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you kind of thing that you'd see in a bad rom-com or bad sitcom, something like that.
Checking Wikipedia, apparently it was the projectionist who worked on the film's dailies, was blindfolded by Lynch to avoid revealing the prop's nature, and he has refused to discuss the effects in subsequent interviews. He's offered that the prop was born nearby, or maybe it was found, and it was speculated that it may have been constructed from a skinned rabbit or a lamb fetus. Speaking of that baby, I mean, we've brought the baby up quite a few times. What an amazing prop, physical effect, skinned rabbit, whatever you want to call it. Like,
it was actually really well done. A lot of the movements were very real, the eyes especially looking around.
So good. For a movie which I don't believe cost very much. I didn't actually see what the budget of the movie was.
14 cents. It took 5 years.
I was really amazed with what he was able to do with what he had. I mean,
not that we know what he had.
No, but I mean,
really
obviously it was a low budget, like, indie production, and he was doing some crazy stuff, and through use of lighting, through use of sound, through use of...
The lighting, actually, now that you mention it, I forgot several times that I wanted to bring it up. His use of lighting was inspired. There'd be just usually one or two things that the light would shine on at any given time in that room, and it would always draw your attention, it would always draw your eye. At the very least, you were never trying to figure out what you should be paying attention to, because it was always well lit, very well lit, and in a way that made perfect sense for it being nighttime and whatever time of day it was. Lighting was spectacular.
I also just want to point out this movie in so many ways. This is his first feature-length film. This is from 1977, and I see Lynch films in this movie. It's almost like this weird time capsule for myself, because it's the first time I've seen this film. The carpet was like the carpet from Twin Peaks. The apartment reminds me of the apartment in Blue Velvet. The body horror kind of stuff and some of the dream imagery reminds me of the stuff from Dune. And there's bits in the movie that remind me of Mulholland Drive. And I just don't know if maybe Lynch is just revisiting themes a lot. He has things in his head that kind of, repeating rhythms and ideas, or
if he's not growing as a director and rehashing his old stuff.
But it added to the experience. It was really rewarding, and it's making me want to go and explore more Lynch, just because in a weird way I feel like Eraserhead is a great primer. I think Twin Peaks is probably his most accessible, and then I think watching something like Eraserhead gives you that other side. And it kind of gives you all the tools I think that you need in order to explore the rest of Lynch's oeuvre. Even the Duran Duran live concert video he shot.
Didn't he also do Lost Highway?
Yeah, he did Lost Highway. He did Wild at Heart.
Actually, his most accessible movie is The Elephant Man.
Ah, yes. Actually, fair enough.
There's nothing weird going on there.
Well.
But yeah, seeing it again, it made a lot more sense. I don't know if that's good or bad, but
I think it's good. I think it actually is, considering the conversations we've had in the past and considering how you went into this movie and considering some of the things that we've said here and now, the fact that you watched the movie and the movie made more sense to you and was more rewarding, and you, I think, genuinely enjoyed it more than you have in other viewings in the past, I think that says something.
Though I'm definitely not sure whether or not the pacing of a lot of these scenes necessarily had to be that slow.
But you get that in a lot of art films. There's a lot of lingering stuff.
Lingering is what they do. There was non-stop lingering. If you would have cut out all the lingering, the movie would have been 14 minutes long.
So I think on that note, is there anything else you want to add before we move on to the judgment phase?
I don't actually necessarily think so.
All right. So we'll take it from the discussion segment to the judgment segment now. Dustin, I know what I think of the film. How would you rate this movie as far as being one of the greatest films of all time? Is this a masterpiece or a museum piece?
As always, when it comes to films, I like to rate them sort of within their categories. And this one being an art house film, I'd be rating it as an art house film. And I think it would be a classic. Like, at the end of the day, even if I didn't understand it in my past viewings, I've seen this movie 5 times. I've gone back to this film. I've seen other art house films, and I've never been like, this is a film I should show other people. So that, at the very least, says something about this film. That even in my younger years, when I didn't care so much, and yeah, I'd watch a lot of movies, but I never thought about them in the way that I do now, I still knew that this is something worth inflicting on my unfortunate friends who now hate me for it.
And now co-hosts. Although I don't hate you for it.
No, see, you appreciate it. Then again, you are a film buff.
Actually, that brings up an interesting point, just to sort of sideline the judgment bit here for 1 second. We've talked in the past about how, since we've done the show, we often will watch movies with kind of a different eye because we've kind of rewired our heads to look at them in a different sort of context for the purposes of the show. Do you think watching it this time, knowing that you were going to be recording and you were paying attention to stuff, do you think that might have had an effect on your experience this time?
Every movie I've seen in like the last year has the experience has been affected. Any movie I watch now, I watch with a much more critical eye, and I watch looking for all sorts of stuff that I never used to care about before, and it can make me more harsh, and it can make me appreciate things in a much different light. And I'm definitely forgiving of a lot of things, like special effects. I know budget constraints. Poor writing, I normally do not forgive ever because that's not a matter of money, but I can find the shiny flecks of gold in a steaming turd, and I can find the cracks in marble. And I find that looking at it with a critical eye is something that probably would help me understand a movie like this a lot better, because it's not something that you can just have on in the background and not pay attention to and expect to completely understand.
You're watching for the visual cues, you're watching for the cinematic language and the imagery.
I'm starting to learn the cinematic language. Like I said, it is a language that we haven't necessarily been taught. I've been exposed to it enough that now I'm starting to understand bits and pieces. I've listened to enough German music that I can start understanding a lot more. Yeah, the more you know, the more you understand other things you might not have been exposed to. And I've started seeing some videos on editing, on structure of stories, on all sorts of other things. And yeah, it's all piecing together so that I understand the language of film a lot better. And that brings me back to what I was saying earlier when I was being a bit more judgy about it. I feel like some of these directors could help those trying to learn the language a little bit, instead of saying, follow the red lamp. That might help somebody who's already taken a few courses, but it's not going to help your layperson who might be trying to get into it, and it might alienate them. And I find no reason to alienate people.
And that's one to grow on.
But back to the final judgment portion, I do think it is a classic. As I said, I've revisited it many a time.
You do think it's a classic, or you do think it's a masterpiece?
Sorry, masterpiece. We changed it every now and then. But yes, I do think it is a masterpiece. It is the art house film that I show people if I want to show people an art house film. And it's one I've been talking about for years, even before I really appreciated it. And it's one that I'm going to continue to talk about, and will probably have to hear about from my friends who actually watch or listen to the show, and who did not much appreciate my showing it to them the first time.
You have friends that listen to the show?
Really, I'd say that the more shocking thing would be that I have friends.
I'm going to wholeheartedly agree you don't have friends. No.
I thought you were my friend.
I'm going to wholeheartedly agree. I was hesitant going into this movie. I wasn't sure what it was going to inflict on my face, but I loved it. I loved it. I think it really is an accomplishment. It's subtle where it needs to be. It's bold where it needs to be. It's provocative. It's interesting. It's definitely a masterpiece. And I would probably, like you, if somebody was looking for something kind of surrealist, art house, I'd be like, hey man, try Eraserhead.
It's the way to go.
It is the way to go. Yeah, definitely a masterpiece.
Well, there you have it.
And we would, of course, as always, be curious to know what you thought of Eraserhead and what you thought of this episode and our commentary on it.
Especially if you had a different interpretation as to the general meaning of the movie itself.
Yeah, I guess I'd love to hear other people's interpretations of this and any other David Lynch film. I think that would be interesting to talk about online. Speaking of talking online, where you can find us to talk.
Segways.
You can find us on Facebook, as always. We are on Twitter at FYC Show. If you get the show off of iTunes, while you're there, it's quick and easy. Please rate the show, review if you've got the time. 5 stars, as always, is fabulous. The show is also available on iHeartRadio and Stitcher. If you have friends who use those podcast providers, let them know about us. If you're enjoying the show, spread the word, share the episodes, tell people we're out there. We're on the social media. Check us out on Instagram. Share us, follow us, like us.
Hate us.
All we want is to be liked.
We just want the attention. Don't even pretend.
And with that, we will bring a wrap to our Eraserhead episode for your consideration. Thanks so much for listening and supporting the show. We'll catch you next time when we're back with another scintillating cinematic commentary.
Another thrilling movie.
From the world of the future.
From the year 2000.
I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenan.
Take care.
Ta-ta. From the year 2000.
That's not the first time you've done that.
Now I'm just going to pretend it's a callback.